I appreciate you can come here and greet me. I like to have a visitor once in a while.
In your view, what's the purpose of banking?
Banks have had a vital role in developing a capitalistic economy over a series of 100 years by bringing together people who had some savings and some assets that they wanted to be safe and liquid, and people on the other side that want to invest in healthy economy. You got to bring these two forces together. Banks were the institutional invention that brought these essential forces together. And then you began to realize in the fullness of time that it had certain implications for economic policy. Economic policy was not exactly in fashion in the 1800s, but people began realizing that banks were doing things that influenced the economy. Or if they got in trouble, you had a problem in continuity of the economy. So banks became very important and then became government supervised. But since then, you now have a highly regulated business, still doing a vital public service, but over the last 30 years or so, people have figured out how to use modern communications facilities and all the technology to do a quasi-banking business outside of banking. And they do it without much supervision. And as it got bigger and bigger, the risk became greater, and you can't exempt the banks, but this system then came to a great climax in 2007, 2008, with a lot of enormous amount of risk-taking, particularly in the mortgage market, that was not perceived and was largely outside the banking system, although the banking system supported these investment banks, so they weren't entirely innocents either. But you now have a whole new competitive strata that hasn't got the same degree of regulation. I've always been a bit cynical about some of the glories of Wall Street, but I never will forget a meeting I went to in Italy. Some young investment banker came down from London and explained to all these businessmen, what did you know about modern financial engineering? There are all kinds of new initiatives in financial engineering to create efficiencies and gains. And if you don't know about financial engineering, you better hustle your way over to London and bring your company up to speed. Well, I found myself sitting next to a financial engineer, a well-known financial engineer. And I said, what's all this financial engineering do to the GDP? Nothing, he says. What do you mean, nothing? He said, maybe do a little bit around the edges, but basically they're moving around the rents in the financial system, from the banks to the trader to the customer. It's not leading to a bit more investment, more efficiency in the whole system. Now, let me raise a question, which bothers me. Why? Well, I read about it, the economy isn't doing well. It's doing pretty damn well. Lowest level of unemployment in many years. But the productivity is so slow. Well, that's a little slower, but I don't know how good those statistics are when you've had this radical change in the composition of GDP. That what they label as financial market contribution, I forget what term they use, of GDP, has about doubled, if I remember correctly, from 30 years ago. It happens to coincide pretty well with the lack of productivity and the lack of income gains for everybody except the top 1%. And the top 1% are the ones that are making all this financial engineering. And is that produced real GDP, or is it just squeezed everybody else who lost their job to these guys overseas or elsewhere? I'd like to see some good analysis of that at some point.
So we're very much focused, and this conference is focused on the root causes of misconduct. Because there are those that would argue that market forces are always going to create a race to the bottom towards greater misconduct, more of that blurring of the line.
And a very kind of near-term focus. They're not worried about what's going to happen in the bank 10 years from now. It's what my bonus is going to be. He talked about the concentration in banking. I just don't think it's, unfortunately, humanly possible to have the banks to the size we have, and the boards of directors that we have are prominent officials in their own right for the most part, and they're very good people, to expect them to get down and know enough about the belly of the bank to know what's going on in terms of conflicts of interest or misbehavior. What were all those directors doing at Wells Fargo? And this is messy business to get into. Directors don't want to get in that business. The chief executive doesn't want to get the directors in that business. So, where does the discipline lie? You have these huge incentive compensation things now, which an invention didn't exist when I was first in banking. And it changes the atmosphere dramatically. I reread Liar's Poker lying in bed the other day. And you just read this as a description of the mentality in trading. They're not worried about the customer, they're worried about the size of their bonus. And how do you avoid that? It's very hard to keep it under control. The New York Times had a section, I think on Sunday, where they listed the pay of chief executives of all the, in the midst of all this complaining about inequities and compensation and so forth, here are all these people getting $20, $30, $40 million on the average of 7% increase when everybody's crying about the 80% of the population that's getting 1%. I heard a story yesterday, and nothing to do with banking, but it's that somebody was being appointed to a prestigious nonprofit position. This would have been 10, 15 years ago. She said, I don't need a big salary. I got all the money I need. Give me $500,000, that's enough. And they say, we can't do that. People will know we're paying you only $500,000. All our competitors are paying $1 million or $1.5 million. We're not worth less than our competitors. We're going to pay you $1 million even if you don't want it. All these directors, they all sit there and say, what is our competitor paying? And we're number one in the industry. We at least got to pay number 3 in salary or whatever. It just goes on and on and on. Now, how you break that, I don't know. Businesses used to proudly say they had various constituencies. To a considerable degree, they've lost that, even if they say it. They've lost. They all say it, and they all got a nice statement about their love of honesty and openness and everything else. How much they enforce it and really, which is hard to do.
What role could public service play, whether it's in actual public service or just a public service mentality, in improving the conduct of financial services?
Boy, I don't know. The public sector is having some of the same problems as the private sector. There's no question about that. Guys coming out of law school, they're coming out of business school or something. Where do they want to go make a living these days? Well, do they want a $200,000 job offer from whatever firm? Or do they want to go work for the Federal Reserve for $70,000 or whatever it is, and or work for the government? It's a kind of an unfair battle. But there should be people that are interested in doing this because they can take some satisfaction out of what they think is a public service. And you're examples of it. But it's necessary to run not just a decent banking system, to run a decent government. It's a challenge for the country. I decided to take the little misgotten gains I got and put at least half of it into this little nonprofit I created. Schools of public administration feel a bit of the loss. They find it difficult to attract students. They find it difficult to know what to teach. They find it difficult to have status in their own universities. And the connection between schools of public administration at the federal level and the federal government, it's collapsed. It used to be pretty close. People who wanted to be in government, in the foreign service maybe, but elsewhere in the government, that drive just has fallen down. It doesn't exist much anymore. So that's what I'm trying to work on. But I'm a little tiny stone in a great big puddle. We lost confidence in government. We lost confidence in banks. We lost confidence in a lot of things. Even the Federal Reserve doesn't rank as high as it used to. It's not just the culture in the banking and financial system, it's the culture. I do think we've done great damage to this. Everything is a stockholder. Everything you do is measured in the results that you have. So if you're operating on an incentive basis, I got a big bonus, I deserved it. And, it gives me an incentive to go out and do something that may be a little bit on the shady side, but and I'm interested in effective government, efficient government. I don't care how big it is. I want it to be done right and done honestly. All this is so recognized. We love to quote Alexander Hamilton. Everybody goes to see Alexander Hamilton, but they don't listen to him. Just in case you have not had this engraved in your mind already. The true test of a good government is its aptitude and tendency to produce a good administration. Alexander Hamilton, 1782.
I think that's a great place to wrap up, Mr. Volcker. Thank you, that was great.